the first dimension of Shabbos, we'll talk about the laws of lighting Shabbos candles. The what, the who's, the when, and the wheres. But before we get to that, let's have a few words of introduction about Shabbos, because Shabbos really is something absolutely beautiful. There's a medrash, very beautiful medrash, which says like this, that the Shabbos, after the creation, Shabbos came to God and said, everything's got a pair except for me. In a minute, I'll explain the depth of what of what Shabbos is saying in a moment. But just to finish off the medrash, it says that God said, don't worry, I'll give you a pair. Your pair will be the Jewish people. Which means your mate will be the Jewish people. Which means that we and Shabbos, we go together. Shabbos is considered to be an ois beinu veincha. Says God, it's a sign between me and you. And something which belongs uniquely to the Jewish people. What's the depth? The depth of the medrash is really something very astonishing. Actually, the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, says that if you study carefully the creation, the days of the creation, and what's going on over there, he says you see a pattern unfolding, which is really quite extraordinary. That the first 3 days of the creation were things coming into being in their, what's the way to describe it, in their raw state. And the last 3 days of the creation, it's put into practical application. So, for example, on the first day, God creates light and darkness. On the fourth day, God creates the sun and the moon, right? Which means that, and the Gra explains that day number 1 and day number 4 are a pair, which means that the raw material of day number 1 is going to be turned into the practical application on day number 4. Day number 2 and day number 5 are a pair. Day number 3 and day number 6 are a pair. And now, of course, the medrash now makes even more sense than it did before, because now Shabbos comes and says, hold on a second, everybody's got their pair, right? Where's mine? And so let's try to work it out, because it really is a very, very beautiful idea. If this pair, the first part, the first day of the pair is the raw material, and then the second day is the practical application. So again, day number 1 and day number 4. Light and darkness, and then you've got the sun and the moon, right? So now we've got a practical application to the light and the darkness. That means that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and he created Shabbos, the practical application of Shabbos is now the Jewish people, right? Which means that without us, there is no practical application to what God has brought into the world. On the seventh day, God created Shabbos. It's there in its waiting, I guess, in its raw state, waiting for the Jewish people to come in order to be able to apply what needs to be done in order to celebrate Shabbos properly. I think it's a very beautiful idea, and I think it adds a dimension to understanding, what Shabbos really is. It's not that Shabbos is just some kind of, God got to the end of the week and then he rested, but rather it's something which we complement Shabbos and Shabbos complements us. And between us, we make it's like a perfect pair. So let's just try to work things out a little bit about Shabbos. Shabbos is described by the rabbis, by Chazal, as being me'ein olam haba, which means a taste of the world to come. So if I were to ask you to describe a taste of the world to come, I think everybody here would probably come up with something vastly different to what Shabbos is. Right? If I were to ask you to describe and to define a taste of the world to come. If I were to ask you to describe Shabbos, if I were to ask you to, you are going to create a Shabbos atmosphere, a Shabbos environment, without knowing what Shabbos looks like right now, right? So you know that at the end of the week, we've got some kind of spiritual dimension, which the rabbis call Me'ein Olam Haba, which is a taste of the world to come. So now I'm asking you let's put together something which will make Shabbos. I don't think any of us would come up with the Shabbos that we have. We would all come up with something which is a lot more similar, I would imagine, to something like Yom Kippur, which is an obviously spiritual day, right? And we'd spend a lot of time in shul, and we won't eat and we won't drink, right? And yet Shabbos is really the antithesis of all of that, because if you take a look at Shabbos, just looking from the outside, what have you got? We eat more than we would normally eat. We sleep more than we would normally sleep. We wear nicer clothing than we would normally wear during the rest of the week. And it seems that there's an awful lot of emphasis on the physical when it comes to Shabbos, as opposed to the spiritual, which is something that needs to be understood. So first off, there's a very incredible idea from Rav Eliyahu Bloch, who was the Rosh Hashiva of Telz, who says like this, very simple idea, that most other religions in the world, what do they dictate? It's a very simple equation. If you want to be more spiritual, you need to be less physical. If you're going to be more physical, then you're going to be less spiritual. It's a very simple, and if you ask me, which you didn't, but I'm going to tell you anyway, if you ask me, it's a very logical equation as well, right? Spirituality and physicality don't seem to go together very easily, I would say. And yet, says Rav Eliyahu Bloch, along comes Shabbos and disproves that whole concept entirely. Because what do? We take the physical and we elevate it, we turn it into a spiritual experience. That's part of what Shabbos is all about, right? Taking the physicality of the world, so wearing nicer clothing and eating more food and sleeping more, and we're going to turn it into a spiritual experience. Of course, it's got to be done properly in order to have that happen, but the Maisa, that's what it all comes down to. It's a very, very beautiful idea, it really is. That what are we learning over? The first thing we're learning over here, which I think is something very fundamental. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought us into this world. God brought us into this world. We are physical human beings. I mean, you know what? I'm looking around the room. I don't know how many of you are human beings, but we are physical. We're physical beings, right? And if we're physical beings, it means that we're going to live in this physical world as physical beings, and we're going to have to use the physical in order to become more spiritual. That's the way that God has created his world. And that's what makes this all so beautiful. It really does. I think I've mentioned it a few times in the past, but it's something which is very, very fundamental and very deep. There's there are two different Talmuds. There's a Babylonian Talmud and a Jerusalem Talmud. And of course, just to confuse matters, the Jerusalem Talmud wasn't written in Jerusalem at all. It was written in Tiberias, but it was during the occupation, which is why it's called the Jerusalem Talmud, because Yerushalayim was in ruins at the time, and it was considered, if they would have called it the Tiberias Talmud, it would have been considered to be a little bit of an embarrassment to Yerushalayim. So they call it the Jerusalem Talmud. But at the end of Kiddushin, in the Jerusalem Talmud, there's an astonishing statement where it says that La'asid Lova, in the future, every person is going to have to give a din and a cheshbon, which means an accounting of the physical pleasures that they did not partake of in this world. I'm talking about kosher pleasures, obviously, right? Before you get too excited over here. What's the idea? The idea is it's really something absolutely incredible. It really is. That a person gets up and says, yeah, you have 120, right? And God is going to say to that person, okay, listen, on such and such a day, you had the opportunity to have a piece of chocolate cake and you didn't have it. How come?
I'm on a diet.
Oh, good, right? So if you say to God, what can I do? I'm on a diet, right? So hopefully God will say, okay, good for you. Although the chances are he might say, are you kidding? You're 300 pounds overweight. What did you think that one piece of chocolate cake was going to make any difference? And anyway, you never lost any weight anyway, right? So who are you kidding? I tell you what the problem is. Up there, one of the names that the rabbis give to up there is Olam HaEmet. It's a world of truth. And it's a bit of a downer because you can't really wriggle your way out of things up there the way that we can over here. It's a lot simpler over here. Yes, imagine in the Olam HaEmet. So here, everyone's got to give an accounting. It's interesting, but really what you said is 100% accurate. Actually, it's not that God's not going to punish you for every single pleasure that you could have had that you didn't partake of. He wants you to give an accounting, that's all, which means if you say, look, my doctor said that eating chocolate cake was bad for my cholesterol level, right? Then good, fine. Then you're not supposed to be having that piece of cake. That's good, right? But if you didn't eat that piece of cake simply to cut off your nose to spite your face, as sometimes people tend to do, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to say, that's a problem. Ask the Pnei Moshe, which is one of the classic commentaries on the Jerusalem Talmud, what's the big deal? Why would that be? So fine, so you didn't eat the chocolate cake, so what? So explains to Pnei Moshe something very beautiful, because most of the physical pleasures that we have in this world come together with a blessing. So when you come to eat that piece of chocolate cake, you're going to make a blessing over it. You're revealing another layer of God's majesty down here in this physical world. And that's why God wants you to give an accounting. That's why God wants to know why you didn't have that piece of chocolate cake.
Speaking of blessings, I just had a question, slightly off
Oh, I
topic.
thought you were going to say,
Very
speaking
quick-
of chocolate cake.
Very quick question. Say you're supposed to do a blessing over some food,
Yeah.
but you forget what it is. Can you just do the Brokatoy, Elohim? Can you just do like the beginning part?
Oh, no, your bracha needs to have something, it's got to have some substance to it as well. However, what you can do, even though there are two different ways of doing things. One is lechatchila, when you do it properly, the way that it's supposed to be done. And the other one is b'di'evid, which is when in most cases, b'di'evid is really de facto, right? You did something wrong, but if you did it that way, it's okay, right? So there is a bracha, there's a generic blessing that we've got, which is shahakol niyeh b'dvaro. The bracha that you make over drinks, the bracha that you make over, chocolate, that kind of stuff, right? Sha'akol niyeh b'dvaro is a pretty generic blessing. It doesn't define what you're eating. All the other blessings that we have, they define things. So, Borei Priya Eitz, you're eating something from a tree. Borei Priya Adama, you're eating something that came out of the ground. Borei Minei Mizonot, you're eating something with grains in it, right? Sha'akol is really God just created all this stuff. Now, if a person really does not have a clue what the blessing is for what he's supposed to be eating, then he can, b'di'evid, he can make the blessing of shehakol niyeh bidvaro, and that way he's said a blessing. It wasn't the right blessing, but it's a blessing which pretty much, it's like an umbrella, it like covers everything. If we're already on the subject, let's just finish it up quickly. That there's, very often people have uncertainties. I think the most uncertainties people normally have with blessings are whether it came out of a tree or whether it came out of the ground. So, for example, a banana, even though it grows on a banana tree, is an ha'adama, because according to the halacha, the tree is really a bush, and it gets complicated, right? Occasionally, some things are obviously what they are. There's an interesting halacha which says like this: if you're uncertain about whether what you've got in front of you is ha'adama, which means it came out of the ground, or eitz, that it came off of a tree, so you can make a ha'adama because a tree grows out of the ground as well. Which means that indirectly you're gonna cover yourself, right, by saying ha'adama when you're not sure what it is that you're supposed to be saying over this particular thing.
I thought the difference that made something ha'etz is when it grows on a branch of the tree.
Actually, the things that make the differentiation over here are to do with the way that the tree grows. Right? Some things are perennials, some are annuals. It's all a little bit complicated. I don't remember. If you want, at some point we can go through the halachas and try to work out what's a bush and what's a tree. Even though something may look like a tree and it's really a bush, and something may look like a bush and it's really a tree. But in Mitzvah Hashem, I don't remember the halachas off by heart right now. So.
Yeah, it goes for also with raspberries and berries. They also, it's like a bush.
Some of these right. Some of these things are a little bit complicated. What do you say over them? What you don't say over them? Whatever. I mean, it's Hashem. You know what? Maybe that's a good idea. Maybe at some point we should just.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Maybe we should go through the definitions of what's what.
And the after blessings too would be good.
After blessings are a lot less complicated.
Oh, they are.
Baruch Hashem.
But also, because rice is mazonos.
Right, rice is here. You've chosen the only one which is complicated. Right?
Yeah.
Rice is the only one where you make a mizonot, but really at the end you don't make an alamichi, you make a bona fashla. That's because of rice. Interestingly enough, rice is a little bit difficult to define halachically.
So this is the catch-all one.
Yeah, here, sha'akol, everything, nihiyeh, came to be, bidvaro, through His word. So if you just follow what you're saying, you're not saying anything which is defining what you're eating or drinking.
What about a biscuit?
I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea.
But what if it's made of grains?
I would say that 80% of biscuits are made of grains. You would have to make a mazonis over it. Some biscuits are not. Rice biscuits, for example, they're a little bit complicated again. Make a mazonis and make a bori pia adoma at the end. Make a bori nefashos at the end. But whatever. I mean, there are certain things. People that suffer from people that eat gluten-free diets very, very rarely say mezonot, because the only thing that they can eat normally is what's it called? Oat flour is the lightest, I think, of all the various flours that there are. There are five different grains, right? And I think oats are the lightest of them all. and whatever. I mean, you know, things to take into account if you suffer from these things.
Does couscous get alamichia, or is that also?
Couscous is an alamichia, very much so. Couscous is mezonos and alamichia because it's made out of flour.
Oh. Quinoa.
Quinoa is an interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting thing in halacha about what it is exactly. Most people are of the opinion that quinoa is not mezonos.
It's more of a vegetable, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I try to steer clear of it because I've been told by I've been told by nutritionists. I've been told by nutritionists that it's healthy, so you know I try to stay away from it. It's I like my healthy things to have chemicals and food coloring and just to reduce a little bit. How much health can a person have, for goodness sakes? Anyway, back to Shabbos. So we've got this incredible combination on Shabbos where we take the physical and we elevate it and we turn it into something more spiritual. And there's a beautiful, beautiful commentary on the Gemara in Shabbos by somebody called Rabbeinu Nissim, who's called the Ran for short, who writes like this: what's the last thing that you do on Erev Shabbat?
I'm going to go to bed.
Okay, if you want to listen to the question, then you might be able to answer it a little bit more accurately. Light the candles, right? The last thing that a person does on Erev Shabbat before Shabbos comes in is that they light the candles, Shabbos candles. Says the Ran, the most beautiful idea. He says the candles represent the physicality of the week. The flame represents the spirituality of Shabbos. Right? Fire, flames are very spiritual things. So he says that what's the last thing we do when it comes to Erev Shabbat is that we take the physicality, we take the power, the energy of the physical days of the week, and we turn them into spiritual energy by putting them on fire, right? Now everybody here understands, right, that if you don't have the candle, you won't have a flame, right? And if you have a flame, right, if you have the candle without the flame, each one is lacking. They need each other in order for them to reach what they need to reach. So the beauty of the idea of what the Ran is saying over here, again, it's reinforcing the same idea, that the days of the week are fundamental to Shabbos. If you don't have the days of the week, then you don't have Shabbos. But if you don't have a Shabbos at the end of your week, then your days of the week are lacking a dimension, they're lacking the dimension which is going to turn into something of significance. Yeah.
Is there any Shabbos traditions that we've added on over the generations that weren't originally held on Shabbos?
Yeah, sure. First of all, perhaps the most basic one of all is Kabbalat Shabbat, that beautiful series of prayers, and specifically Lecha Doidi. Lecha Doidi was written only 500 years ago by somebody called Rosh Shlomo El-Kabatz. And it was introduced, and it became, it's fascinating. If you know anything about different communities and how they pray, what is fascinating about Lecha Doidi, that beautiful song that's sung on Kabbalat Shabbat, is that it was accepted by everybody, and it's only 500 years old, which means that the tefillahs that we've got that are prayed by everybody are normally tefillahs that go all the way back to the men of the Great Assembly. We're going back to the destruction of the first temple, right? We're going back a long, long way. And all of a sudden along comes, Rav Shlomo El-Kabatz, living in Tzfat 500 years ago, introducing a new prayer which the Arizal incorporated into his Kabbalat Shabbat, and that's what caused everyone else to incorporate it into theirs. And all of a sudden you've got as far as I know, every single Jewish community has Lecha Doidi inside of their Kabbalat Shabbat. It doesn't matter where they come from. And that's something pretty unique, actually, because, again, you have to understand that even though 500 years may sound like a long time, but 500 years ago, the different communities and their different customs were very, very much established already. And to have a new custom introduced and accepted by everybody, that's quite a unique occurrence, actually.
You said which rabbi made Lecha Doidi?
Shlomo El-Kabatz. Anyway, so that's the beauty of Shabbat, the depth of Shabbat. What is the function of Shabbat? the function of Shabbat is to draw us back to God. The Sfas Emes, one of the great Hasidic commentaries, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, the second Ger Rebbe, says that the word Shabbat comes from the word lashuv, to return. Which means, what are we doing on Shabbat? We're returning to our natural state. Our natural state doesn't mean after 2 bowls of cholent on Shabbos afternoon being comatose. That's not what it means, right? But our natural state, sorry about that, yeah. Our natural state means that we are connected in a very clear, in a very obvious way to God. It's not like the rest of the week. And the rest of the week it's hard to find God. We've been busy, caught up inside of, everything that we do inside of the week. And it's difficult. It's not so easy. And Shabbat, the whole function of Shabbat is to draw us closer to Hashem, right? And that's why I always mention my wife's grandfather was, Mamash, he was a shtickle tzaddik. He was like a very righteous man. And he had a little phrase, whenever you asked him how Shabbos was, he said, Shabbos is always good. It took me a long time to realize, if you just stop and listen to what he's saying, Shabbos is always good, which means that if Shabbos was lousy, it's not because Shabbos is bad. The problem rests with us, not with Shabbos, right? Shabbos is always good. It's a prize, a present that has been given to us by God, and we need to learn how to tap into its incredible potency. It really is something extraordinary. And there's a rabbi, actually a rabbi from Monsey, Rabbi Ezriel Tauber. Have you ever come across him? Yeah. So I remember hearing from him years and years and years ago, when he said that he'd been in the Far East for business, and he was supposed to get a plane out of there in time to be home for Shabbos, and there was a delay of some kind, and he ended up being, stuck in wherever he was. I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was Singapore, maybe it was Hong Kong. I don't remember. And he had the airline booked him into a hotel room, and it was like half an hour before Shabbos. And he suddenly realizes in his hotel room, everything is electronic. Now, nowadays, that seems to be the case in a lot of places. But in those days, you're going back, 30 plus years, it was quite a novelty. You walk in, the lights come on, right? You move around, the air conditioning, if you open the window, the air conditioning goes off, right? All these various things. And he said he suddenly realized that if he left his hotel room to go to Daven on Friday night, so he was going to come back, he would be able to get back into his room, because the minute he would open the door, the lights would come on. Right? So he didn't know what to do. So he went down to the reception and he asked if maybe they had rooms that weren't so technologically advanced and they didn't have. And he said, he was happy. I think he was staying in some fancy hotel like the Hilton or something. He was happy to sleep on a couch in the lobby over there somewhere. But they weren't very happy in having somebody sleeping over there. So he realized that he was going to have to spend Shabbos by himself in his hotel room, right? A prisoner, locked in to his own room, because if he went out, then he wouldn't be able to get back in again. And he said his wife always sent him, whenever he went traveling, his wife always sent him with, Shabbos, just in case something went wrong, with a few. So he had a couple of rolls, and he had a little bottle of Kiddush wine, and he had the wherewithal. There's a big bowl of fruit in the room as well. So he wasn't going to starve to death, but he was concerned. He was very upset. And he said the Friday night was horrible. He said it was mamish horrible. He said he was stuck in that room, didn't want to be in there. He'd wanted to go to shul, and in the shul they had like a communal dinner as well. It was going to be something very nice, and there he was stuck in his room, couldn't do a thing. He says Shabbos morning he got out of bed, and he realized that that he doesn't. There's no other alternative. He's stuck here anyway, so he should really make the best of it, right, and not sort of walk around depressed and moping around. And he said that he managed. He said he davened every single word out loud. And he said he had the most unbelievable Shabbos day. He mamish felt like he was connected to God, because the only reason he was in that room was because HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to keep Shabbos, right? And he said that it was like a turnaround for him. He said it was the most incredible experience to be just you and Hashem and nobody else. It reminds me of a story. I have a friend who's from Australia, and he was traveling from here back to Australia, and he ended up also getting stuck. He was in Singapore, stopped over Shabbos in order to get to Australia. You can't. There are no direct flights. It's a long way. And he said he was there on Shabbos, and he was up on the 17th floor of the hotel that he was staying in. And he says it's Shabbos morning, and he's climbing back up. He's finished shul, and he's climbing back up the stairs to, get back to his room. And he said on the 12th or the 13th floor, like a waiter came out of the service lift, the service elevator, right? And he sees my friend like puffing and panting his way up the stairs, and he says to him, "What are you doing?" So he says, it's our Sabbath today. He says, so the fellow says, "Well, why don't you go on the elevator?" He says, no, he says, "It's forbidden for us to do any work on the Sabbath." Right? And he said he can hardly breathe, and he's climbing up. He says until today, this guy probably thinks he's completely and absolutely certifiable, which I'm not suggesting he's not, but not for that reason anyway. So that's what Shabbos is all about, right? Shabbos is the idea of joining back together with God. To come from the Lashon Lashuv, to return to Hashem. Right? Teshuvah, by the way, is also coming from the word of Lashuv, to return. So it's interesting that the idea of repentance is the idea of returning. What is the function of repenting is to return you back to where you're supposed to be. And the function of Shabbos is really also to realign ourselves and put us back in the position that we're supposed to be in, so that we can recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there.